In 1951, North Korea was at war with South Korea. And one of the towns they captured, that the North Koreans captured, was a town that had a small church and some Christians in it. Well, when they went in this church, they took all the people that were in the church outside, and they found a picture of Jesus in the church, and they put it on the ground in front of all the parishioners. And they asked each one of them to come up and spit in the picture and pledge their allegiance to North Korea. So one after another, they told them if they didn't do that, they would die. So one after another came up, spit on the picture of Jesus, and then went back in line. When they got to the end of the line, there was a little girl about 10 years old. And she just stood there as the soldiers were there with their rifles, and they told her to spit on the picture, and she said that how could she do such a thing for a person that has done so much for her, and she refused. At this point, the guards and the soldiers were so astonished by her bravery and commitment to what she believed that they shot and killed everyone else except for her. They let her live. And I know that's a graphic illustration, but this is what we're going to find in Daniel chapter 3. What would you do if you're put in a position where either you comply or die? And don't think this can't happen here. We saw just a few years ago where they told Americans, and even created a lot of persecution and penalties and consequences. Either you get a COVID shot, or you're not going to work anymore, you're not going to be in the military, you're not going to be able to attend school. A lot of different things. And either you comply or face the consequences. Sometimes and for some, it was death. It was loss of family. Maybe it caused a divorce, a struggle. How many families fought over this issue? Or loss of a position at work, whether you were a policeman, or I know a lot of people in the medical profession had a real struggle with this. And then those that did take the shot, many of them ended up dying. So the question begs in Daniel chapter 3, we're going to come to this point in our lives, perhaps many times, not if, but when people are going to ask us to do something that goes contrary to the Word of God. What are you going to do? Unless you had the kind of conviction that Daniel's three friends had, you're going to lose out. Okay, let me give you a little background, refresh the story. Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 had a dream. And this dream cost him insomnia because he couldn't understand what it had to do. And apparently he kept having this dream recurrently. So the only one that was able to tell him the dream and give its interpretation was Daniel. And Daniel told him that in this dream he saw a statue, huge statue that was made out of different types of metal and even a little bit of clay. And Daniel told him that the statue represented successive kingdoms that was going to come, starting with him and following in what's called the times of the Gentiles. Okay, and he said to Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head, you're gold. Okay, and then he gives him the prophecy, which I talked about in my last video. Well, some years go by, and historians tell us that that Nebuchadnezzar may have been thinking that some of these successful kingdoms may be plotting an uprising against. Anyway, he wants to make sure that everybody's loyal to him. So he creates an image of gold, and he sets it up and commands that everybody, when they hear music, bow down and worship him. And this is where we go to Daniel chapter 3. Okay, this is written in Aramaic, It's not in Hebrew because we're now dealing with the times of the Gentiles. We're in a timeout period as far as eschatological timeline goes. And we're going to pick it up from there. And I'm going to read to you some from Daniel, and then I'm going to explain to you what it is all about. In the book of Daniel, in chapter 3, I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll read some of it so that you can have a grasp of the picture of whole. And I put some actual pictures up here. You know, when I was doing that, I was thinking about, in the Sunday school, they used to put like the flannel graphs and then a picture so they could do a Sunday school story. Well, I thought that, well, adults need that too. I like to see visuals too. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, and then he gives this description: 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. So it was a tall, kind of skinny statue made of gold. And he set it up in the plain of Dura, the province of Babylon. Apparently this was a place where everybody around could see it. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, and governors, and all the VIPs. He told them all to come after he does, and to come to the dedication of the image he set up. So all these VIPs showed up. Okay, and they assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they all stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, a messenger for King Nebuchadnezzar, "This is what you are asked to do." No, it doesn't say that. This is what you are commanded to do. Now you think about when somebody commands you to do something, whether or not they truly have the authority, as far as God is concerned, to command you to do something. You go back to Matthew, and Jesus says, all authority on heaven and earth is mine. Not the government, not anybody else, but mine. Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. Okay, so whenever government asks you to do something, or anybody asks you to do something that they don't have authority to do, you can pretty well ignore it. Okay, now there may be some consequences. Anyway, so this is what they command. O people, nations, and men of every language, as soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So it's very clear here what they're commanded to do. They're to bow down to this idol that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up of himself as soon as they heard the music. I'll talk more about that in a second. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of all this music, everybody started to bow down, except for 3 men. Now, Daniel's not figured in on this. I guess he's away or somewhere. But what we have now is the astrologers and all these people that were supposed to be wise were pretty stood up in Daniel chapter 2 because they weren't able to give Nebuchadnezzar and tell him the dream nor the interpretation of it like Daniel was. So Daniel was highly esteemed in King Nebuchadnezzar's eyes, as well as his friends. So these people that were jealous of them are bringing this plot against them so that Nebuchadnezzar can kill them. Okay, and that picks up in verse 8. But before we get there, let me show you something. So here you have Nebuchadnezzar. He creates this idol of himself. And then he has music. And the music is playing because music is a powerful, powerful influence on your emotions. Mix that with peer pressure. If you've ever been to a rock concert or to any of these mega churches where you see the music and smoke going and lighting and all that, it moves people to do things that they may otherwise not do. Okay? Everybody's doing it. I don't want to be left out. Okay? So you have all the sheep following the crowd. And Nebuchadnezzar does this. So apparently in Mesopotamia, their music had a big part in the things that people do. Okay, so he has this music, and this peer pressure, and all these people bow down except for Daniel's three friends. Okay, now these astrologers, they know this, so they go and tell Nebuchadnezzar. This is where we pick up in verse 9. At this time, the astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You issue a decree." They reminded him what he did, that everyone who hears the sound of music, they're to fall down and worship your image of gold. And that whoever does not, they remind Nebuchadnezzar of the consequence, are to be thrown into a blazing furnace. Oh, but King Nebuchadnezzar, there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They don't pay any attention to you, king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of the god, gold you have set up. Okay, so they sowed the seed in Nebuchadnezzar. So, Nebuchadnezzar at this point, he's furious with rage. And so he summons Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he's going to give them another chance. And he said to those that were brought before him, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?" You see, deep down inside, he admired these men. Now, he's going to give them another opportunity, okay? That you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up. Now, I'm going to give you another opportunity. When you hear the sound of the music, I want you to bow down and worship it, or you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God? Then he challenges her. He should have never said this. Then what God will be able to deliver you from my hand? You can just see and picture, and I do in my mind, this proud, arrogant king who's getting up in age, who sets up a goal of himself, who's becoming insecure. Okay, say to these three young men who had served him faithfully, "What God can save you from me?" Notice how they respond. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before this matter. If we are thrown in the blazing furnace, the God we serve," first of all, let's listen to how they describe God, "is able to save us from us, and he will receive us from your hand, O king. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down, and we will not serve your God that you have set up." There's a lot of application you can set up, because a lot of people make mistakes. Look, God will deliver me from this, but you don't know what God's going to do in his sovereignty. He may not. He's able, but it may be his desire to let me go through this, like he did with Peter. He told Peter, what did he tell him? "You're going to deny me 3 times, but let him go through that." Why? So that Peter could learn. Then Peter didn't do that again. Okay, not in that way. And so sometimes God delivers you. He could have kept Peter from going through that temptation, but he didn't. Sometimes God will rescue us, and sometimes he won't. But these young men were of the opinion, whether he does or doesn't, we're not going to serve you. But you need to know that he is able to that challenge. They say, who was able to rescue me from my hand? God is able. Our God is able. Okay, well, when Nebuchadnezzar at this point was absolutely furious with the way they talked to him. And his attitude towards them changed, and he ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than it normally is. And he asked some of the strongest soldiers that he had to bound them and throw them in the furnace. And the command that he had was so urgent that the men in throwing them in were all killed. and they threw him in this. And I pictured in my mind how this, it's kind of like a funnel, okay, and they had kind of like a stairs that went up to it. In the big front, there was kind of an opening, kind of like looking kind of like that with stairs, and you can see the men there. They were killed so that Nebuchadnezzar still had an eye view. He could see what was going on inside. And it said the king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they were tied up. Okay, and they threw them into the fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, after this happened, leaped to his feet in amazement, and he asked his advisor, "Wasn't it 3 men we tied up?" He says, "I see 4. I see 4 men in there, not 3. And they replied, "Oh yeah, King, it was. We just put 3. How is it there's 4? And he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the Son of a God." What he was seeing was a theophany or Christophany. That's the pre-incarnate Christ in the Old Testament who appeared at different times. He saw literally Jesus Christ in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. At this point, he calls out, "Shadrach, come on out of here!" And the satraps and all these people got around them, and they were just stunned with amazement. And they noticed they were unbound. None of their clothes was burned. There wasn't even a smell of smoke on them. Their hair wasn't singed. And at this point, Nebuchadnezzar praises the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and elevated them and said that if anybody has anything bad to say about them, their houses would be demolished and they would be torn in pieces. What an amazing story. Let me go back over this a little bit. Okay, first of all, what is an idol? Because you gotta, whenever God gives something to us in the Old Testament, it's meant for us to learn something for today. What is an idol? An idol, by a biblical definition, is anything that takes the place of God. Anything. And in fact, let me give you a couple of examples of an idol. As for Catholics, it may be an image of Mary, or, all you go into church and you see all these saints made up and all around the church. I know I grew up seeing all that. Could be a rosary. It's something that they elevate more than what it really is. And how many times I got different groups that I'm on that they put and they pray to Mary and all that. That's a form of idolatry. And when most of us think of idolatry, we kind of think of that. Buddhists they have a Buddha, sitting Buddha. Mecca, they have the Kaaba, the black stone in Mecca for Muslims. Okay, so when we think of idols, we think of that, but there's many other kind of idols. Television can be an idol if it takes the place of God. Money, the love of money is the root of much evil. A lot of people, they put money ahead of God. Clothes, friends, rock music, drugs, pleasure, all kind of things can take the place of God. That is an idol. Okay, now, what kind of person would set up an idol? Generally, somebody like this is selfish, bitter, self-centered. I see these pictures, like on Facebook, some people, they post pictures of themselves every day. They want to be worshiped. They want to be idolized. They want to be recognized. There's something really wrong with that. Now, let me give you a little saying. Okay? It's not bad to think of yourself, to think less of yourself. Okay? Because you're made in the image of God. What's bad is when you don't think of others more. So we should think of ourselves not less, but think of ourselves not as much. That's, they asked Mike Tyson once, famous boxer, if he got insulted when people criticized him and said things about him. He says, when I used to think of myself as being somebody special, it really offended me. But when I think of myself as nothing special, then it doesn't. And that's it. For a guy like that, that's pretty sound advice, okay? It's generally somebody that's very self-centered and narcissistic, okay, that would tend to put up an idol of themselves, okay? And we see a lot of them in our society today, and they want to rule and control everybody, and they want everybody to look to them, and like if they are more important than other people, they put themselves on a pedestal, okay? Now, let me say this. In the Old Testament, there's the fourth and fifth commandment. Said this: you shall not make for yourself any carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. So one of the commandments, that's very clear. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they knew this. In the New Testament it says too, but now I've written to you not to keep company with anyone that calls himself a Christian who indulges in sexual sin, or is greedy, or is an idol worshiper. And we see a lot of that in Christian rock music and mega churches, where you have these musicians that promote themselves and their music more than they promote the Lord Jesus Christ. They charge exorbitant prices to go to their concerts, and people, they get pictures of them and they pay all this to go see them. This should not be in the church of Jesus Christ at all. That's why I won't go to any. If you're at a church that has a praise band that are up there jumping around with, I won't go. It turns me off. If I want to do that, I'll just go to a bar, nightclub, and there the music's better anyway. So I'm not challenged to go to any kind of church that has a praise band or anything like that. It reminds me of everything I came out of. And so that sort of thing doesn't do anything for me except to create memories that I don't want to have in a place of worship. What real worship is. Real worship isn't all about, music. And Jesus says, and the Apostle Paul said it's in Ephesians, understand that the days are evil, being filled with the Spirit, singing hymns and musical songs. And in other words, there's an infilling before there's an outpouring. And so I understand the theory of Christian music really well. Okay, so again, it's a movable influence. You get Christian kids, and they've grown up in that, and they get led into things that they would otherwise not do. Okay, so the New Testament has a lot to say about it. Okay, now here's the thing. You see the plot, you see the peer pressure, you see all the people bowing down, you see what happened, the persecution they have. And then the providence of it is that Jesus was right there in the fire with them, walking around with them, and he protected them, okay? He had a purpose in it. He had a purpose because he wanted to show Nebuchadnezzar that even though Nebuchadnezzar was king, that God was still sovereign and he was in control. Okay, so there's some principles you need to walk away with. The first one is, how in the world did Daniel's friends make that decision to not go along with the crowd and do this, even though it was going to come? Because if you go back to Daniel 1:8, it says they purposed in their heart not to defile themselves. You cannot do it at that moment. You got to do it before then. When you sit down and think and you have your quiet time or you're talking to God, God, I'm going to honor you. I'm going to please you. I don't care what my friends say. I don't care what my family says. I don't care what the government says. I don't care what anybody else says. Lord, I want to honor you. I'm going to humble myself before you, Lou, and I'm going to be obedient to you, even if it costs me my life. Okay? That's what they did. That's how they were able to do that in the face of danger. So now when the COVID come, how are you prepared? I saw many people give in because they weren't properly prepared. Okay. It's not if, but when you're going to go through a trial. We're all going to go through fiery trials. Okay? But when we go through these trials, during the trial, Jesus is going to be with us. Okay? He's going to untie those bounds because it's the fire that gets them loose so that you can be set free. His goal is to conform us into the image of his Son. And sometimes it takes a fiery furnace to put us through. Those of you, like I have, that have gone through these things, you know that when you come out of them, you're a lot better, you're a lot stronger, you got a lot more joy. Okay, so we don't want them, but when they come, we need to recognize that God is allowing us to go through this so that he can do a couple of things for us. One, he delivers us. Second, he wants to promote us like he did Daniel and his friends. Okay, he's going to protect us and he's going to promote us through the fiery trial. Now, you would think that after all this, Nebuchadnezzar would get the picture that even though he's the king, God is the one that is sovereign and controlling everything. People, let me tell you something. He didn't get the message. And we're going to see in the next chapter, he's about to go through an incredible, mentally disturbing process for a long time. He's going to become mentally unstable and insane. Okay? That's what pride. Why do you think so many of these liberals and Democrats think crazy? Because their minds have been developed into a reprobate. God turns them over. He says over and over in Romans, he's going to turn them over into professing to become wise. They become fools, even to the point of becoming like an animal. You cannot reason with them. Okay, so there's a lot of danger here too. Danger for Nebuchadnezzar, yet instruction and wisdom for Daniel and his friends, and instruction for us as well. Okay, God bless you. Do the right thing. When you go through a fire, recognize that God is going to be right there with you. He wants to deliver you and promote you.